All right, get ready because we're going deep into training for high energy dogs today. And it sounds like you've got one of those furry dynamos yourself, keeping you busy. Our source is High Energy Dogs 101. It's full of great info, so get ready to learn. We're going way beyond just sit and stay. We'll figure out how to tailor exercise to their specific needs, especially for breeds like Huskies. You know, the ones that never seem to run out of steam. Oh, and this is important. It's not just about getting them physically tired. Mental stimulation is key too, because a tired body doesn't always mean a tired mind.
That's so true. High-energy dogs aren't just randomly bouncing off the walls, they're literally designed for it. Like huskies, think about it. They were bred to pull sleds for hours, like across miles and miles of frozen landscape. That drive to run is still a part of them. Actually, studies show that for every hour of intense exercise, their mental energy drops by about 20%. So they're much less likely to get into trouble after a good workout. So yeah, exercise is really important, but we've got to be strategic about it.
Strategic exercise. I like that. So we're not talking about just a quick walk around the block. What's the difference between how we should exercise a puppy versus an adult high energy dog?
That's a great question. Puppies are basically little balls of energy, but their joints are still developing. If we overdo it too early, they could get hurt. And those injuries can last a lifetime. So with puppies, we're talking short bursts of activity, maybe 15 to 20 minutes at a time. And do that maybe 3 or 4 times a day. Now, adult dogs, they're built to go the distance. We still need to use our heads when exercising them. The source recommends at least 1 to 2 hours of exercise every day, and it's best to break that up into a couple of sessions.
Okay, so 1 to 2 hours for adults and short bursts for puppies. But how do we actually make that happen? It's like, what kind of activities are we talking about? I know my dog loves fetch, but I bet there are ways to make it even more fun and engaging, especially for high energy breeds.
You're right, fetch is awesome. But you can totally supercharge it. You can switch up the toys, use different sizes, different textures, and here's a great tip. You can even add in commands, like drop it or wait. So it's not just physical, it's a brain game too.
It's like sneaking in some extra training while they're having fun. That's awesome. Speaking of fun,
Yeah.
I've always been curious about agility training. Is that something you can do at home, especially if you're just starting out?
You definitely can. Backyard agility is a great way to get started. You don't need anything fancy either. Cones, tunnels, you can even make jumps with stuff you have around the house. It's all about challenging your dog, both physically and mentally.
I love that. I'm totally picturing myself building an obstacle course for my dog. Oh, and we can't forget about the classics, like tug of war. My dog goes nuts for that.
Right. Tug
Yeah.
of war is great. It really works their whole body. And if you do it right, it's really good for teaching them impulse control. You're basically teaching them to let go when you say so, which is important for a dog that always wants to go, go, go.
That's such a good point. Now I gotta ask about those breeds that are basically born to run. Like huskies.
Mhm.
Their exercise needs must be on another level. The source mentions some pretty hardcore activities.
Yeah. Huskies and breeds like that, they definitely need more than a walk around the block. Bike shoring is great for them. That's where your dog runs alongside your bike, harnessed, of course. Super important to have the right gear.
Mm.
And to make sure you're building up their stamina gradually. And if you live somewhere cold, sled pulling or even wagon pulling are amazing activities. They tap right into their natural instincts.
Wow, I can't even imagine the workout they get from all that. So it's clear that physical exercise is super important for these dogs. But you said something earlier that I want to get back to. Mental stimulation. How important is that? Especially for these intelligent, high energy breeds.
Mental stimulation is just as important as physical exercise. Remember how we were talking about exercise impacting their mental energy?
Mm.
Well, if they don't have a way to use their brains, it can really backfire. Imagine being cooped up all day with nothing to do. You'd probably go a little stir crazy too, right? It's the same for dogs. But instead of going crazy, they start chewing on things or
Mm.
digging or barking. They've got all this energy bottled up and they need to let it out.
So even if they're getting enough exercise, they can still act out if we don't give them enough to think about.
Exactly. They need outlets for their bodies and their minds.
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
So what are some fun ways to give them that mental stimulation? I've heard about those puzzle feeders, the ones where you hide treats and they have to figure out how to get them out. Are those a good option?
Puzzle feeders are fantastic. It's like brain games for dogs.
Mm.
You can even adjust the difficulty. So it keeps them challenged without getting too frustrated. And it plays into their natural instincts, to forage and scavenge. Plus, there's so many different types. You're bound to find one that your dog really enjoys.
It's like a delicious challenge. And what about those snuffle mats? I've seen those online, where you hide treats in the folds of fabric.
Snuffle mats are great. They're all about using their sense of smell. And dogs have incredible noses, way more powerful than ours. Using their nose in a fun and engaging way is really good for them.
I bet they go nuts for those. And what about those scent work games? Can you easily do those at home?
Totally. Just hide some treats or toys around the house or yard and encourage your dog to find them. It's a great mental workout, and it's a lot of fun for both of you.
Okay, so we've got physical exercise, we've got mental stimulation, starting to get the picture here. But we also need these dogs to be well behaved, right? So, how does obedience training fit into all this?
Obedience training is super important, but it's about more than just teaching commands. It's about building a good relationship with your dog, one that's based on communication and trust. It's like learning to speak each other's language.
I love that. It's about working together, not about trying to be the alpha, but consistency is key, right?
Absolutely. Think about it like this. If you were teaching a kid their ABCs, you wouldn't change the order every day, right? You'd stick with it until they got it down. It's the same with dog training.
That makes a lot of sense. So, what are the most important commands for a high energy dog?
The source really emphasizes the basics. Sit, stay, come, and leave it. These aren't just for show. They're the foundation for safety and good behavior, which are super important for high-energy dogs especially.
Oh, yeah, I can see how a solid come command would be a lifesaver,
Yeah.
especially with a dog that loves to bolt. Any quick tips on how to teach these commands effectively?
Positive reinforcement is the best way to go. Treats, praise, toys, whatever your dog loves. Make it a fun game for them, and they'll be eager to learn.
So, it's all about making it positive. But how about those times when they just can't control themselves? They're always raring to go. How do we teach them to chill out a bit?
Impulse control. That's the holy grail of training high-energy dogs. Imagine your dog bolting out the door before you can even get the leash on. Not fun.
Oh, I don't have to imagine it. Happens more often than I'd like to admit. So how do we teach them to wait?
You can start with simple things, like practicing wait before meals, or before you open the door to let them out. It teaches them to be patient, which is so important for a high-energy dog.
That makes sense. What about leash training? My dog pulls like a sled dog the second we step outside.
Leash pulling, yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah.
A no-pull harness can help. It distributes the pressure more evenly and makes it harder to pull. And here's a pro tip. As soon as they start pulling, stop walking. Don't start again until they come back to your side and are walking nicely. Reward them for walking on a loose leash. They'll figure out pretty quick that good things happen when they're not acting like a sled dog.
Great tip. Okay, we've covered exercise, mental stimulation, obedience training. What else do we need to think about with these energetic pups? Diet has to play a role, right? I mean, they need the right fuel to keep going.
Absolutely. It's like this. You wouldn't put cheap gas in a race car, would you?
Huh. Great analogy. So, what should we be feeding these high-energy dogs?
High-quality food is key. Look for something with high protein to help build those muscles they're always using, and healthy fats for sustained energy.
What about joint health? Some breeds, like Huskies, are prone to joint problems. Is there anything we can look for in their food to help with that?
You're right, that's super important, especially for breeds that are likely to have joint issues. Look for food with ingredients like glucosamine and chondroitin. They help support healthy joints. It's like preventative maintenance.
So high-quality ingredients are a must. What about portion control? I'm always second-guessing myself on how much to give my dog.
You can start with the guidelines on the food bag. But remember, all dogs are different. You might need to adjust the amount depending on their age, activity level, and breed. Puppies need more while they're growing, and you might need to up the portions for adult dogs if they're super active.
Makes sense. And what about treats? Treats are important for training, but I don't want to overdo it and end up with a chubby pup.
Treats are great for motivation, but try to keep them small and low calorie, especially during training sessions. You can even use some of their regular food as training treats.
It's a great idea. This is all so helpful, but I have to say it's a lot to take in. Any advice for first-time owners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed?
The best thing you can do is start early. The sooner you start socializing your dog and teaching basic obedience, the better. And remember, patience is key, especially with puppies or rescue dogs who might not have had much training in the past. It might take a little longer, and that's okay.
That's reassuring. So it's about taking it slow and celebrating the small wins. What about experienced owners, like people who have well-trained, high-energy dogs? How can they keep things challenging for themselves and their dog?
There are lots of options. Look into advanced tricks or tasks or even dog sports. Agility, fly ball, herding trials. There's a whole world of fun activities out there.
That sounds awesome. I bet those activities would really tap into their natural instincts and keep their minds sharp. I'm thinking if I have a retriever, maybe some field training would be perfect.
Exactly. If you have a dog that loves water, try dog diving or water retrieval games. It's all about figuring out what makes your dog tick and then giving them a chance to do it.
I love that. It all comes back to understanding their individual needs and tendencies. But let's be real, even with the best intentions, things don't always go perfectly. What are some common behavioral issues that come up with high energy dogs?
One of the big ones is destructive behavior. But a lot of times, they're not actually trying to be bad. They're trying to tell us something's wrong.
So it's less about them being naughty and more about us figuring out what they're trying to say.
Exactly. If they're not getting enough exercise or mental stimulation, they're going to find a way to let us know.
That makes sense. What about when we can't be with them all the time? How long can we realistically leave a high energy dog alone?
The source really emphasizes enrichment, especially when they're by themselves. If you leave them alone for long periods of time without anything to do, they're going to get bored, and that's when the trouble starts.
So if we do have to leave them alone for a while, we need to make sure they have plenty to keep them busy.
Absolutely. Puzzle feeders, durable chew toys. You can even set up a little scavenger hunt with treats before you leave. Anything to keep their minds and bodies active.
Those are all great ideas. This has been super helpful. But now I'm thinking, how do I actually put all this into practice? What would a typical day look like for a high energy dog, especially one that's prone to getting into trouble?
Well, the source actually gives an example routine. We can adapt it to your specific needs. It's a great place to start.
Okay, let's hear it. What does the morning look like?
They recommend starting the day with a brisk walk or jog. Aim for about 30 minutes. It gets the blood pumping for both of you, and it helps set a calmer tone for the rest of the day.
Sounds like a great way to start the day. What comes after that initial burst of exercise? More training.
Yep. They suggest fitting in 10 to 15 minutes of obedience training after that walk or jog. It doesn't have to be a long session, but consistency is important.
So we're not just tiring them out physically, we're also reinforcing those commands and setting them up for good behavior.
Exactly. Then, around midday, it's time for some playtime. Ideally in a fenced-in yard where they can really run free.
Time for the zoomies. Are there any specific activities they recommend for this part of the day, or is it more about letting them do their thing?
A bit of both. Fetch, tug-of-war, even just letting them sniff around and explore are all great options. Oh, here's a good tip. Try feeding them their lunch in a puzzle feeder. Keeps them mentally stimulated while they eat.
Oh, I like that. Brain workout.
For the evening, they suggest another walk. But keep it shorter this time, maybe around 20 minutes. You don't want to overstimulate them before bed. You can follow that up with a mental activity, like an agility course or a scent game.
So we're easing up on the physical activity, but still keeping their minds engaged.
Exactly. And then, to end the day, some quiet relaxation time, maybe with a few chew toys.
Perfect way to end a busy day for both of you. This routine seems like a great starting point, but I imagine it needs to be tweaked depending on the dog, right? Their needs, their personality.
You're absolutely right. The key is to find a balance that works for both you and your dog. This is just a guideline. Feel free to adjust it based on your dog's age, breed, energy level, and your own lifestyle too.
So it's all about being flexible and adaptable, just like with any good training plan. But before we move on, I want to remind everyone that this is just the beginning. There's so much more to learn about training and caring for high-energy dogs, and we'll be going deeper into some of those topics in the next parts of this series.
That's right. We've covered the basics, but there's always more to learn. And in the next part, we're going to talk about dealing with challenging behaviors and how to prevent them from happening in the first place.
Can't wait. But before we get to that, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Now that you've got a handle on the basics, how can you incorporate your dog's natural instincts into their routine, like their herding instincts or their retrieving instincts?
That's a great question. It's all about finding creative ways to let those instincts shine in a positive way.
We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive into high-energy dog training. Until then, happy training. And don't forget to embrace the zoomies. Welcome back. We're diving back into high-energy dog training. In part 1, we laid a good foundation. We talked about their crazy energy levels and how to create a balanced routine for them.
Yeah, and now we're tackling something I know a lot of owners struggle with: preventing behavioral problems. It's frustrating, right? when your furry friend starts chewing on everything or digging or barking nonstop.
Totally. You feel like you're doing everything right. But they still find ways to get into trouble. So where do we even begin? Is it about figuring out what's causing these behaviors in the first place?
Often, these behaviors, they're not just because your dog is being disobedient. They might be trying to tell you something's wrong. Remember, they can't exactly use words.
Right. So they communicate through their actions. And we know high energy dogs need a lot of physical and mental stimulation. Is that usually where these unwanted behaviors come from? Like they're not getting enough of what they need?
Exactly. It all comes back to that balanced routine we talked about: exercise, training, and mental enrichment. It's like a three-legged stool. If one leg is shorter than the others, the whole thing becomes wobbly.
Okay. Love that analogy. So how do we make sure those legs are all the same length? How do we prevent those negative behaviors before they even start?
Well, let's start with exercise. We know how important it is. But it's not just about how much they get, it's about the type of exercise, too. A 30-minute walk might be enough for some dogs. But for a high-energy breed, that's just a warm-up. They need activities that really challenge them, physically and mentally.
So we're talking about things like fetch, but maybe over longer distances, or adding in some hills or sprints.
Exactly. Remember, huskies pulling sleds for miles. We need to give them outlets that let them tap into those instincts. Even something like fetch can be more challenging in different terrains, like a hilly park or a sandy beach.
Makes sense. And what about agility training? We talked about setting up courses at home, but would taking a class or joining a club be even better for these dogs?
Agility classes are fantastic. They get a great physical and mental workout, plus they get to socialize with other dogs and people, which is really important for these breeds.
So it's not just the obstacles themselves, it's the learning process, the mental challenge of navigating the course.
Exactly. And speaking of mental stimulation, let's talk about training. How does that help prevent behavioral problems?
Well, I'm guessing it's more than just sit and stay. It's about giving them structure, a sense of purpose, especially for those high energy dogs.
You're right. Training is definitely mentally stimulating. But it also sets boundaries and expectations. Dogs thrive on routine and consistency, and training provides that.
So it's like giving them a job to do.
Exactly. When they know what we expect from them, they're less likely to get into trouble.
It's like setting them up for success. But even with enough exercise and training, sometimes there might be something else going on, right? Like underlying anxiety or fear. Could that be contributing to behavioral problems, especially in high energy dogs who are already prone to being a bit reactive?
That's a great point. It's easy to forget about their emotional well-being. Dogs have feelings too. They can experience anxiety and fear, just like us. And those emotions can show up in a lot of ways, including those unwanted behaviors.
So even if we're doing all the right things, exercise, training, enrichment, it could still be something else that's stressing them out.
Exactly. It's so important to pay attention to their body language. Are they pacing, panting a lot, hiding, whining? Those could be signs that something's wrong.
So they're trying to tell us something's bothering them.
Exactly. And we need to figure out what it is. It could be a fear of loud noises or a separation anxiety, or even just a change in their routine.
And if we can figure out what's causing their anxiety, are there ways to help them cope?
Absolutely. For some dogs, having a safe space to go to when they're feeling stressed can help a lot. For others, it might be desensitization training, where you gradually expose them to the thing that's making them anxious.
And if it's something more serious like separation anxiety, maybe they need professional help.
You're right. In those cases, it's best to talk to a vet or a certified dog behaviorist. They can assess the situation and give you specific advice.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about general strategies for preventing behavioral issues, but I'm guessing there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Definitely not. Every dog is different. What works for one might not work for another. You have to be observant and willing to adapt.
So how do we know if our current strategy is working? Are there any red flags we should be looking for?
If you're giving them plenty of exercise, mental stimulation, and training, but they're still having those unwanted behaviors, it's time to reevaluate your approach. Pay attention to their body language. Are they stressed? Frustrated? Are the behaviors getting worse? Those are signs that something needs to change.
And how do we troubleshoot and make adjustments?
Well, you could try increasing the intensity or duration of their exercise. If you've been doing 30-minute walks, bump it up to 45 minutes. Or add some hills or sprints.
So even if we're exercising them regularly, we might need to do more.
Right, and think outside the box when it comes to mental stimulation. If puzzle feeders aren't enough, try scent work or hide and seek with treats. You can even teach them new tricks or get them involved in a dog sport.
It's all about keeping their minds engaged and challenged.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask for help if you're feeling stuck. A certified dog trainer or behaviorist can give you personalized advice and help you create a plan that works for your dog.
Like having a coach in your corner.
Exactly. And remember, training is a journey, not a destination. It's something you work on throughout your dog's life.
I love that. So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the most important thing to remember about preventing behavioral issues?
Be proactive and pay attention to your dog's needs. Create an environment where they can thrive, both physically and mentally. And those unwanted behaviors are less likely to happen in the first place.
Makes sense. When their needs are met, they're happy and balanced.
Exactly. And by being proactive, you're preventing problems and strengthening your bond with your dog.
So, before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I want to hear from our listeners. What's the most challenging behavior you've faced with your high-energy dog, and what strategies have helped you? We'll be back soon to wrap things up with some final thoughts and tips.
See you soon.
All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive on training those high-energy pups. We've covered a lot of ground. We talked about their crazy energy, how to prevent behavior problems.
Yeah, and now I want to kind of shift gears a bit. Talk about the bigger picture.
Okay, what do you mean by bigger picture?
Well, we've talked about techniques and routines and activities, but those are all just tools, really. They help us get to something much deeper, building a strong bond with our high-energy dogs.
It's not just about training them to obey or to stop them from getting into trouble. It's about really understanding them, right? Their personalities, their quirks, what they're afraid of, what makes them happy.
That's it. It's about building a life together, where their needs are met, and you can both be happy. And that brings us back to what it really means to be a responsible dog owner.
It's a commitment, for sure. You're promising to take care of their needs, physical and emotional, for their entire life. And that can be tough, especially with a high-energy dog.
It's not always easy, that's for sure. You'll have challenges, frustrations, times when you wonder what you got yourself into, especially when they're bouncing off the walls at 5 in the morning.
Oh, tell me about it. Those early morning zoomies are real. But even with the challenges, it's so worth it. That unconditional love, their loyalty, the pure joy they bring to our lives.
It makes all the hard work worth it. And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. First, remember that patience is key.
Training takes time, it takes consistency, and it takes a whole lot of love. You'll have setbacks, times when you feel like you're not getting anywhere. But don't give up, celebrate the small wins, and never stop believing in your furry friend.
And along with that, embrace the journey. Training isn't about reaching a finish line. It's about learning and growing together with your dog.
Be open to trying new things, different approaches, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Okay, we're almost done. Any last words of wisdom you want to share?
Never forget the power of connection. Spend time with your dog, do things you both enjoy, build a bond that goes beyond just training. That's where the real magic happens.
That's beautiful. So as you go out there and train your high-energy dog, remember these 3 things: patience, persistence, and love. Those are the keys to a happy and fulfilling journey with your dog.
And that's a wrap for our deep dive today. We hope you learned a lot and that you're feeling inspired and ready to put these tips into practice.
Thanks for joining us. Happy training, everyone.